anything going on there.
Well, welcome. Thank you for being here. I'm going to go ahead and get started. What I'm doing today is I'm giving you a preview of the Sacred Ground program. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to show you some clips, some video clips, and then we're going to talk about it. But first I'm going to tell you about the program, how it works, what it's about, that sort of thing. Sacred Ground is a film and readings-based curriculum that we enter into in small group settings. We watch it together, and then we have conversation, watch the documentaries, read things together, or read them, do homework ahead of time, and come back together and have conversations about it. And the program was actually specifically designed for white people to talk about race together. One of the things that happens is that when you have a group of mostly white people and there's one person of color, they can end up doing all the heavy lifting and having to represent everyone else. And so this is an opportunity for us to do our work. And it was very carefully created for exactly the way that we're going to be using it. It was created so that we would have an opportunity to look inside ourselves and discover our own truths, and look outside of ourselves and learn about the history and the history of racism in our country and in the world, but mainly in our country. And the way that the program works is that it's 11 sessions long, and we'll be meeting in this room on the first and third Wednesday of each month until we finish. And there's a couple of months where we get preempted by the calendar. Like the first Wednesday in January is the 1st of January. So, it's not a good day to meet. We won't be meeting on that day. So the program will run from October through March. I think there's a couple of months in there where we only get one meeting. And that's okay, because there's actually quite a bit of reading that we're going to want to do in between sessions to prepare for the next session. The readings, some of the readings are given. You'll get an email with an attached document, that kind of thing. Some of the readings come out of books. This is one of the wonderful books of the program called Waking Up White by Debbie Irving. And, she's white, and she talks about her experience of coming to grips with racism and privilege. It's really excellent. Another book that there's readings out of, you don't end up reading the whole book, but you're going to want to, because it's so excellent, is So You Want to Talk About Race, which is an excellent book. And there's some readings from Jim Wallace's book On God's Side. No, this is the wrong book. I picked up the wrong book. Another book by Jim Wallace called America's Original Sin. Okay, which you may have heard of. How funny that I picked up the wrong book. I haven't read this one. Okay, so forget that. How to Be an Anti-Racist. There's some readings from Jesus and the Disinherited, which is it's a seminal book. It's so powerful and so good. So the format is that we will usually watch a video together, and then we'll have a conversation where we'll talk about our reactions to what we've seen and learned, and to what we've read in the past week. So it's a very interpersonal program, and we learn from each other and from the materials that we're grappling with. So this is my second time facilitating this program. I led it during the height of the pandemic when everything was shut down. And we did the entire thing on Zoom. And we had 28 people participate in the class. And there were 28 people at the end. That tells you something about how engaging the material is. It's very, very well done. And yeah, it's challenging to talk about racism. It's challenging to talk about institutional racism and how it has affected our lives and the lives of so many people of color. And we end up being so enriched by having these conversations. And so it's really quite worthwhile. So, are there any questions before I move on? What I'd like to do this afternoon is show you, I'm going to start with the trailer for the first movie that we'll watch in the program. It's not a movie, it's a documentary. And it's 90 minutes long, so it'll fill most of the first session when we meet. But I'm just going to give you a taste of it, the trailer, the 6-minute teaser, right, to get you interested in it. And then we're going to we're just going to talk afterwards. We'll talk about what did you see, what's your reaction to that. So let me see if I can get this going again. I probably can.
Americans don't have ties of blood. We're not all one ethnic group. We're not all one religion. So what does hold us together as a society?
We're coming apart. Our institutions don't work. Our political system is so polarized.
In times like this, we need stories that remind us of the ideals that hold us together. We aspire to be a country where immigrants can find opportunity.
The same group of people that were against our Hispanic brothers and sisters coming in had grandparents that were immigrants. That's why we did what we did.
A country where access to education can change everything.
We've got to help these kids. We've got to be the ones that find the way.
What does it mean to you, Nadir, whenever you hear the word American?
That you're free to decide who you want to become.
You don't join the military to be in one political party or not. But when the nation is in crisis, you serve.
I met Mark through a friend of a friend who thought that the founder of Move On should be the founder of the Tea Party Patriots. And you better believe I was dusting for days beforehand for that because I was anxious.
I don't even know what liberals eat, so what do you prepare for liberals?
Equal opportunity. I think that that's one of the cornerstones of our identity as a nation, but has that promise ever really been the reality?
Do we really know truly what it means to be American when we study history and how many lies we be fed?
The idea of patriotism in this country tends to be turning away, not looking, denying. But as an artist, I think that there's no greater love of a nation than to look for the places where we're not doing our best job.
With so much diversity, we have to bond to a common sense of what we're trying to achieve. You have to understand what the common aspiration is. And I think we've lost sight of it.
All right. What did you notice?
People of color. Talking about it.
It's a diverse group of people that were talking to you.
A lot of anxiety.
A lot of anxiety about where we're going. Do you feel that? Yeah.
Images that hold people together, like the athletic event or the celebration.
What else did you notice? What feelings did you have as you watched that?
Agreement. Agreement
Okay.
with what they were saying.
There were very many older people represented, really mature people, I mean.
Okay.
At least I didn't notice many.
Okay.
Sense of distance between the different positions that people are situated in life and how that has an effect on the experience they have and their perceptions.
I noticed that there was a laugh in the room when the founder of the Tea Party Patriots said, "I don't even know what liberals eat."
I wasn't laughing.
Yeah,
I don't know what that means.
What liberals eat.
that was so. It reveals though what happens when we stop thinking of people that have different ideas than us as being worthy, right? And thank you very much.
I feel like I could write an entire essay on just that comment.
Right, exactly. That's awesome. Thank you very much. I printed out the syllabus for the series, and those people at 9 o'clock took them all. I mean, what's up with that? Anyway, I have several more copies of it here, which you can look at afterwards. So that for me was like one of the most truthful moments of that little promo for this 90-minute documentary. And it reveals just how deeply divided we've become as a country. I'm pretty sure this movie is I know it's less than 10 years old. I think it's about 6 or 7 years old. It was fairly new when I led this program the first time in 2020. And that feeling of, you hear these horrible people being called horrible names, and and it goes both ways. You see liberals who think that anyone who's voting Republican must be heartless and et cetera, and Republicans who think that liberals they must be foolish or whatever, right? And for him to say, "I don't even know what liberals eat," it just shows how little experience he has in life with someone who doesn't agree with him, right? But I want to, as hard as that is to be confronted with that, those two people become fast friends over the course of meeting each other. And that's the value of a program like this, is to reveal these gulfs that we create within ourselves and within our society, and how artificial they are, and how readily we can, if the gulf itself is a lie, right? The fact that the idea that we're separated is a lie. If we just stop believing it, that the gulf goes away. And that's what you see happen during that segment of this documentary. You see these two people, they realize that they have so much more in common than what divides them. Even though she's the founder of MoveOn.org, there's rarely been a more liberal organization than that, and he's the founder of the Tea Party Patriots, which, wow, there you go. That's pretty conservative, and they find common ground. So now I'm going to share another video. This one's really short. I think it's only like 3 minutes long, and then we'll have another conversation.
You may think you know exactly what race you are, but how would you prove it if someone disagreed with you? The fact is, even though race drives a lot of social and political outcomes, race isn't real. One of the first people to attempt to categorize humans according to race was a German scientist around 1776. He came up with 5 different groups according to physical appearance and geographic origin of their ancestors. Americans of European descent eagerly bought into this type of thinking around the same time. Some historians have said the idea that there were different races helped them resolve the contradiction between a natural right to freedom and the fact of slavery. If whites were their own distinct category, then they could feel a lot better about denying freedom to people who they labeled black and decided were fundamentally different. But as political priorities change, definitions of race in America adjust right along with them. For example, if you are of Mexican birth or ancestry in the United States in 1929, you were considered white. Then the 1930 census changed that to non-white to limit immigration. Later, when the U.S. needed to increase its labor force during World War II, these people were switched back to white. And what it took to be black once varied so wildly throughout the country, from 1/4 to 1/16 to the infamous 1 drop of African ancestry, that people could actually change races just by crossing state lines. Then suddenly in 2000, the government decided that Americans could be more than one race and added a multiracial category to the census. This has left many Americans scratching their heads when it comes to selecting who they are. As many as 6.2% of census respondents selected some other race in a 2010 survey. The idea that someone might look one way and identify another way, or that they might be really hard to place in a racial category, is not new. This is why there was a public debate about whether MSNBC's Karen Finney could say she was black, or how we can't even agree on the racial label assigned to the President of the United States. Of course, many people feel their racial identity is very clear and very permanent, but the fact that some people have changed theirs and that no one can really argue with them shows how shaky the very idea of race is. This is all because there isn't a race chromosome in our DNA that people can point to. It simply doesn't exist. When the medical community links race to health outcomes, it's really just using race as a substitute for other factors, such as where your ancestors came from, or the experiences of people who may have been put in the same racial group as you. Dorothy Roberts explains that sickle cell anemia is a prime example of this. The disease is linked to areas with high rates of malaria, which include some parts of Europe and Asia in addition to Africa. It's not actually about race at all. This, of course, does not mean that the concept of race isn't hugely important in our lives. The racial categories to which we're assigned can determine real-life experiences, they can drive political outcomes, and they can even make the difference between life and death. But understanding that racial categories are made up can give us an important perspective on where racism came from in the first place.
Well, what do you make of that?
Wish you could have spoken a little more slowly.
Yeah, that's pretty fast.
Yes.
That's true.
Well, the nice thing is some of those videos, you can change that playback speed, and you can definitely, that will allow you to hear it at your pace if you're going to be watching it by yourself.
Interesting concept. I guess I don't really ever thought about that as why the determination really came about race. Never thought about like the sickle cell, and I just assumed black.
Yeah.
Obviously not true.
Just like HIV is a gay disease, except it's not. It just happens to be the population that was hit the hardest at the beginning of the disease in the United States. That's the kind of thing that we see happening. And the whole concept of race and being of different races was invented. And it was invented, not surprisingly, at a time when whole populations were being subjugated for the enrichment of other populations. What else did you notice in that?
Those same issues, within the last month, right? There was month, 6 weeks, there were about the multiracial kind of thing, people, arguments about Kamala Harris switching her race, as if that's like not recognizing the nuance or or the variety of heritage that is like always existed, but people with this external pressure to identify a particular way at a particular time to a particular group, or it's some sort of like societal demand that you have to pick something to communicate from that. It's a way for us to then understand or start to make judgments or set up our belief system about who this person is. Kind of like when you ask like where people work, like, oh, well, what do you do? One of the first things you ask, right, is what do you do? And because you're trying to put a construct to understand what this person is and start making assumptions about that. So it's not surprising, but I just feel like it reflects that lack of nuance that we recognize in individual people rather than this monolithic race. All black people look like this, or act like this, or think like this. All liberals think like this, or eat like this, whatever the othering.
Yeah. So this is not part of the curriculum at all, but Alice shared this with me the other day, and I thought it was brilliant. Has anyone here heard of Ursula Le Guin?
Oh, yes. She's my
Ursula Le Guin. Ursula K. Le Guin was a science fiction writer, and her father was a famous anthropologist. So she writes, if you deny any affinity with another person or kind of person, if you declare it to be wholly different from yourself, as men have done to women, class has done to class, nation has done to nation, you may hate it or deify it, but in either case you have denied its spiritual equality and its human reality. You have made it into a thing to which the only possible relationship is a power relationship, and thus you have fatally impoverished your own reality. She's not only a good writer, that's pretty brilliant. But when we objectify people, when we deny their humanity, we impoverish ourselves and we damage them. All right, there's one more thing, and I'm really hoping that my computer will last long enough to show it. I can't find a plug close enough to here to plug in, so we're going to try.
Be one back on that ledge someplace.
There's one on the floor here, but there's only one outlet, and my computer won't reach that far. So, but anyway, let's just give it a try. I think we're going to make it. I have faith. It's going to be close, but we'll make it.
It was a time when hundreds of thousands of GIs came home ready to start families, but had no place to live.
In the 1930s, the federal government created the Federal Housing Administration, whose job it was to provide loans, or the backing for loans, to average Americans so they could purchase a home.
Federal programs and banks sank millions into the home construction industry. Their message to veterans: you can afford a new home. Buy a new home now. Tax dollars helped make the single-family home a mass-produced consumer item. The American dream had a new name: suburbia.
We came to Levittown and we found the model house, and we walked in and we looked around, and of course, in the eyes of a young man who was raised in the ghetto, so to speak, it was an interesting experience, interesting lifestyle, seeing all the new modern conveniences, very fascinating.
Eugene Burnett came home with almost 1 million other black GIs. They had fought for the country in segregated ranks. They returned hoping for equality and the American dream. For many, that dream was a new home for little money down and at some of the easiest credit terms in history.
I went up to the salesman, we're interested in your home, we're interested in buying one, and what is the procedure? Is there an application to be filled out? So forth. So he looked at me, looked around, and he said to me, he says, listen, it's not me, but the owners of this development have not as yet decided to sell these homes to Negroes.
The FHA underwriters warned that the presence of even one or two non-white families could undermine real estate values in the new suburbs. These government guidelines were widely adopted by private industry. Race had long played a role in local real estate practices. Starting in the 1930s, government officials institutionalized the national appraisal system, where race was as much a factor in real estate assessment as the condition of the property. Using this scheme, federal investigators evaluated 239 cities across the country for financial risk.
So that those communities that were all white, suburban, and far away from minority areas, they received the highest rating, and that was the color green. Those communities that were all minority or in the process of changing, they got the lowest rating, and the color red. They were redlined. As a consequence, most of the mortgages went to suburbanizing America, and it suburbanized it racially.
As homes in white communities appreciated in value, the net worth of these white families grew. For most non-white families who stayed in urban neighborhoods, the housing market open to them in the 50s and 60s was largely a rental market. You don't gain equity by paying rent.
Where one's family lives in America is not just a matter of taste and preference. You have the issue of housing and wealth. The majority of Americans hold most of their wealth in the form of home equity. So that's their nest egg. That's how they can finance the education of their offspring. That's how they can sort of save up for retirement. It's their savings bank, right? They're living in their savings bank.
My family, like a lot of families, was in Detroit, struggling to buy a house. You had a dual housing market, one white and one black. A housing market with one with a lot of demand, another housing market with very little demand. My father lives in the house that I grew up in. The house today, 5-bedroom house, is worth about $20,000. That same house bought in the suburbs would be worth today about $320,000. So whites moving to the suburb were being subsidized in the accumulation of wealth, while blacks were being divested.
And these were public policy decisions in which, on one hand, people were given access to property, given title, and subsequently wealth, and on another hand, where people were not given access to property, did not generate wealth, and did not generate the kind of opportunity for the next generation.
Turn it off, hopefully it's going. So pretty sobering, huh? That's a pretty grim reality to be revealed. I saw this illustrated. A friend of mine moved from San Francisco East Bay to St. Louis, and I visited him there, and he took me on a ride through the city, and it's a beautiful city, lots of wonderful neighborhoods with old, beautiful old houses, it was the gateway to the West. It was just, you know, there's all kinds of, it used to be a very, very wealthy city. And we're driving through town and we get to this road and he says, okay, this Division Street is the red line. And at the time I thought that it was literally like there was this line, not like on the ground, but like a designation. But it turns out this is the kind of redlining that he was talking about. So we get to this street, and on one side of the street you have a city with suburbs and shopping centers and you know, office buildings and hospitals and universities. And on the other side of the street, most of the blocks are empty. There are a few buildings here and there. I think one of the more predominant things that I noticed were little fast food joints. And then every once in a while there would be this little oasis of a neighborhood that had survived. And that was the result of redlining. The other side, that side of the street was redlined, and that meant that the people in those neighborhoods could not get loans to buy a house or to improve their house, etc. And their homes weren't worth anything because they were in these redline neighborhoods. And they just fell into disrepair, and now they're gone. That's the reality. And that was just such a stark example. We drove into that neighborhood, and it was like entering a post-apocalyptic nightmare. And that's the reality. So, what other things did you notice in the video?
That's the very definition of institutionalized racism, when it had the blessing of fair use.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very institutionalized. It's baked in.
The material inefficiency of it actually is so stark that that really kind of underlines, in a way, how dedicated the system is to racism. Because the further out you move people, the more expensive it is to get them what they need. But you'll do that, you know, if you really think it's worth it. If there's some kind of force that's, you know, making that worthwhile in some way, no matter how inefficient it is.
So one of the things that we learn as we go through other videos and other books that we read in this program is, where did all this come from? Why in the world would someone invent a system like this? And it actually is closely related to the old feudal system where there would be a lord who had, you know, owned property, and then there would be serfs that lived on the property, and so the way that wealth was generated was by having people to do work, so that you would take the surplus or any extra of their work, right? The lord would, and the lord becomes wealthy, and the people in return get a place to live, you know, and they're allowed to live and eat some of the produce that they create. That system gets, you know, twisted to create racism, to create slavery, right? And that system, that same mentality of using people to accumulate wealth, literally using them, is what we see in the early colonial days of this country. The way that this curriculum works, the way that this program works, is that we watch these really difficult things. Like, I mean, you know, this is just a taste of it. But the good news is that as we watch these things, we talk about them and we work through them and we come to understand them, and we learn how to be in the world so that we're not contributing to institutionalized racism, etc. And so the Sacred Ground program is definitely challenging. I look at your faces right now and I can see you're feeling it. I'm feeling it. It's hard to look at that and not just be shocked, right? To see it starkly. It's one of those things that's usually just kept secret. The good news is the overall experience of doing this program is one of liberation and joy. I think it's one of the most valuable programs I've ever run in a church. And the people that did it were enriched by it and were all happy that they did it. I started with 28 people on Zoom in 2020 when I first led this. And at the end of the program, there were 28 people in that class. 28. The same, we had, all of us were still there at the end. That tells you how good it is, how engaging it is. If it was just all grim and horrible and miserable and, getting beat up, nobody would have stayed. We would have ended with 3. But we ended with 28. So anyway, I commend it to you. I think it's an excellent program and very, very, very worthwhile. And I'm noticing, here we are, we have, about 16 people in the room. That's a little too many for a good conversation. It is, because you don't feel safe speaking out what you're feeling, especially if it's something challenging. At 9 o'clock, there were 8 of us, which is perfect, right? That's why we create cohorts, and we don't sit in a plenary session like this and have conversations like I just asked you to do. We sit in small groups and we talk to each other, and we're in the same small groups every week and we work through it. I am going to try to run an online version of the class at the same time that we have in-person cohorts. So any other comments or questions? Yeah.
When I was growing up, I often heard people say about the fact that black people were living, turned out to be a ghetto because they made it out. And it's sad that we never knew about this whole thing with redlining. Portland did it a lot and actually went through a black neighborhood. I guess bought all the houses or either just tore them down to build I-5. And growing up and listening to that, and I think about it, looking at just what we just looked at, and it's like people didn't know, so they form these opinions based on just what they see and not why it actually happened. And it's really sad, and I think that a lot of the division in this country is because of things like that.
One piece that was missing for me, I mean, all this is important and everything, but that's the indigenous people.
Yeah.
I mean, the original sin, think of slavery, but there's another original sin too, which is genocide.
That's absolutely true.
And I was sensitive to this because I spent part of my priesthood in interior Alaska among the Athabascan people.
Yeah, there's a whole documentary that talks about how on the East Coast, as the colonies were formed, the natives that lived there were wiped out.
Yes.
And it's very challenging. It's very depressing to see that. So this program does look at African Americans and their experience in America. It looks at Native Americans, people of color, people of from the Pacific Islands, that sort of thing. There's a pretty good cross section of people of color represented throughout the course of the program. But thanks for bringing that up. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Some practical questions. You said it's going to be on Wednesdays.
Yes.
Wednesdays a month. What time of day?
Well, I'd like to run it from 7 to 8:30, and sometimes we might have to go a little bit later than that to finish because, like, that first trailer that I showed you is for a 90-minute movie. So, it's going to fill the whole time, and then we want to have a little time afterwards to talk. So it'll be from 7 to 8:30 where possible, and occasionally we'll slip a little bit closer to 9. And I have up here, this is a little half-sheet flyer. It has an invitation to Sacred Ground, and on the back there's a sign-up sheet, so you can sign up, or you can just send me an email and tell me that you want to do it. So, and feel free to come up here and take a look at some of these books. Any other questions or comments?
Just 2 questions. Is there a reading list?
Yes.
And will it be available on Zoom?
The class will be available on Zoom. I want to create a cohort that is just on Zoom. Last time I did the whole thing on Zoom, and this time I want to do it with in-person cohorts here. And at the same time that we're doing it here, I'll have someone running the Zoom as well. Yeah. And so most of the readings are like, you'll get a document in your email, and if you don't have an email or the ability to print, I'll be happy to print stuff for you. There's a couple of books that you're going to want to get. Not this one apparently, some of them. This is the one that we probably do the most reading out of, and you can get it at the library, or you can buy your own copy. And if that's a problem for you, let me know. I'll be happy to help anyone get a copy of any of the books. Yeah, Michelle.
When does it start?
It starts the first Wednesday of October, which is on here. It's October 2nd. Yeah, the list of dates is on this sheet here. So. Yes?
So another practical question, if you're doing the Zoom and they have their own cohort, and in person have their own cohort, like we travel toward the end of winter, so would not be here in March. So is it possible to kind of at least listen in with?
Oh yeah, I mean, if you can't be here, that's one of the advantages of Zoom. We'll just fold you in.
Okay, because you wouldn't want to interrupt the kind of cohort that you have, so that's.
It'll be okay. It'll be okay, yeah. I mean, it's nice to have people in the group that you know, and you get to know each other as we work through all of this. But it's also, it'll work fine for someone. If you can't be here on a particular Wednesday, but you could Zoom in, then please just do that and we'll make it work.
It's probably more about smaller, right?
Yeah, you just need a smaller, you need a small enough group so that everybody has a chance to say something, and so it doesn't feel too intimidating to say something like in front of a big group. All right, well, thank you very much for coming, and I hope you'll consider participating in the curriculum. And like I said, there's these sheets up here. Feel free to grab one. And there's also a few copies of the syllabus here that tells you about what we'll be seeing. Awesome.